What is up, everyone, and welcome to the Infinite Jest Course. And I am super happy you decided to embark on this journey with me because I have two main jobs as your guide on this journey through Infinite Jest. The first one being that I have to get you through this novel. Infinite Jest is one of the most unfinished novels of all time. And so I am going to be here in my office hours daily, posting weekly course videos, posting diagrams and a bunch of text beneath these videos to help explain to you what is going on, or at least give you the clarity so you don't feel too lost. And that moves into the second point, which is I'm here to educate you and entertain you, and hopefully help you see the deeper layers of Infinite Jest that you may just pass on by as you are reading the book. And these podcast episodes are going to be available, obviously, on video, but also in the Substack app, in Spotify, YouTube Music, Apple Music, or Apple Podcasts, and a couple other podcast platforms. And you can upload a private RSS feed to whatever podcast platform that you want and listen to it there. And I'm sure you can download the file and be able to listen to it without internet. And so my hope with these videos is that you're going to read the chapters, then, as you are commuting or cleaning your house or doing whatever, be able to listen or watch the analysis of the chapters. And then we can come together, whether in my office hours or on the Sunday book club call times, and I'll be able to work together to be able to get through this novel. And so some quick things to note: all the hardcover and the paperback versions of Infinite Jest have the same pagination. And before every video, I will also include what the chapter starts with. So if you are using Kindle or an ebook reader, you can understand where we are at in these videos. And so this video is going to be covering chapter 1 and some introductory elements for Infinite Jest so that we can hopefully have the right mentality on this journey. Because if you've already read, and hopefully you've already read pages 3 through 37, if you are watching this, because there'll be spoilers for that section, then it was pretty easy. It wasn't the most crazy or confusing thing you've probably ever read, but it's going to get a lot harder. So some of the axiomatic elements we're going to discuss today will help us in the future. And I will also not be spoiling anything later in the novel during my analysis. And this video is a part of the Infinite Jest course. And if you are watching this free on YouTube, we have an Infinite Jest course and an Infinite Jest book club that goes to this level with every single chapter in the book. I am slowly building it out right now, but I will have the first initial 100-hour course done by the end of 2024 if you are seeing this later. And I'm always going to be running an Infinite Jest book club. Once we finish, we will do it again and again. And so if you want to read Infinite Jest with a group and hear deep analysis every single week, I would love to have you in there. If you cannot join now, join later and catch up, binge the content, binge the reading. And for decades to come, we will be waiting for you in the Infinite Jest course and the Infinite Jest book club. And that kind of gets to another point about who is this course for, because this is just version 1 of the course. And I would call this the beginner to intermediate version of the Infinite Jest course. There are people out there. I have a friend actually named Alex who did his thesis on Infinite Jest and has read it so many times. And he is out there and he's going to be listening because I'm going to be commenting on all the various elements. But some of you guys are experts. And in the future, we are going to be doing expert deep dives into Infinite Jest, like reading the book chronologically, with certain lenses. Like, it's going to pick up after this initial read, but I want to set the base for anyone who is coming to Infinite Jest for the first time so that they have a system to get through, even if you've read it multiple times. I'm hoping if you enjoy my content and my videos, my interpretation and the deep dives into the elements of the story are going to be entertaining for you. Because, for instance, if you've watched in the David Foster Wallace course, my video on Wallace's essay, Authority and American Usage, we do some beautiful deep dives in there. For instance, I probably spent 30 to 40 minutes talking about, the big debate in linguistics between Peirce, Derrida, and Saussure, however you say his name. And I built charts and diagrams and walked you guys through. When Wallace would mention a poem, I would do a poetry analysis and explain how that related to the essay. And so that's what we're going to have the ability to do here, to kind of do lengthy endnotes on some of the more important elements of the story. And it's like little mini videos on various topics in the social sciences, humanities, or just in life as we're going through the course. And so, if you don't find me entertaining for whatever reason, I'm going to make as big of an effort as I can to include a lot of text, like the base breakdown of what is happening at the bottom of the weekly course posts. So if you don't have time or whatever to listen, you can access that. And that leads me to the first thing that's going to be available to you guys to look down beneath this video right now, which is the 28 chapters of Infinite Jest. And there are 28 chapters and 192 subchapters or subsections, excuse me, whatever we want to call them, of Infinite Jest. And the way that we determine the difference is that if you see these two chapters here, they have the title, but then above them there is this shadowed circle. And so there are 28 shadowed circles in Infinite Jest, but there are 192 of just these normal chapters or subsections. And within all of this, there's really 6 different sections of Infinite Jest, because as you were reading it, suddenly there's going to be shifts where it may become more easy to read or harder to read, or where certain elements and characters are all converging or will just back out all disconnected again. And all of this understanding will help you, because David Foster Wallace does say on page 113, it will help your attitude to look for evidence of a design. And I think that's important, that when we need to search for form and meaning within all of this, because it's already going to be very complicated for us to pull all these different threads together. And the 28 chapters, official chapters, do cover a somewhat consistent theme. And then in the 192 other sections, it's little glimpses into things that help build out the story. And almost 99% of the time, there's no deviation of the world that is within that chapter. We're not jumping. There's nothing crazy going on. If we are reading, for instance, about Don Gately or the incandenzas in one of those sections, that's what we will follow through with. And another thing to note, is what does this mean? The year of the depend adult undergarment. And I'm not going to spoil, we can't get into everything yet regarding this, but I'm going to give you guys the rundown so it is more apparent. And I'm going to put down below the different years and the years they somewhat correspond with in reality, because most of the novel is actually taking place in 2009. Even though the book was being written in the 1990s, it was set in the future around 2009. And so Wallace has created a world in Infinite Jest where there is a North American superstate, and this isn't going to ruin anything. This is exposed in this sections we've already read. And time has become subsidized, and the time we are seeing in Infinite Jest is subsidized time. And what that means is that American corporations have bought out the calendar year. So corporations bid against each other, for instance, to be 2024. So instead of saying, it's August 12th, 2024, I would have to say it's August 12th, the year of the Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich. And so automatically we are seeing kind of the imprint of consumerism and these ideas that we're going to be exploring, and loneliness, these major themes, just with the structure of the novel and the time of the novel, which is beautiful. And I've heard a lot of criticisms of this style, but if you think about it, it isn't totally unrealistic. When you look at fashion and how people used to dress 100 years ago, they would never necessarily want to brand themselves or wear certain brands or do these certain things, but now we are peacocking and fashion and how we present ourselves and brand ourselves. Literally, branding out into the world has changed dramatically, and eventually that won't be enough. We've already kind of hit that level with politicians and corporations branding out and supporting political or whatever causes on whatever side so that they can further make money. And so a lot of the lines have been lost. And so I think it is a clever idea by Wallace that really helps fuel the novel. And I can't get into some of the crazy stuff and threads about subsidized time because it would just spoil everything. But rest assured, we will be talking about it again. And down below, there is a general marker of the certain years we are going to be in. And I'm going to be talking about this. Speaking of the novel, in this, I'm going to be saying we're in the year of the glad right now. And I'm hoping through enough explanation, especially in the early sections, we can have that memorized by the time we're halfway through the novel, so we can easily shift without having to go down and look at the resources. And so We have finally arrived at our analysis of actual chapter 1, which features Hal Incandenza at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And he is being interviewed for a scholarship for the tennis program. And this is such a bizarre way to open a novel because chronologically, as you're going to see down below, this is the end of the novel, basically. And so we are thrust into a world and into a situation that doesn't have very much of a buildup. You know, a lot of novels, a lot of classic novels, we get a buildup there. But right now we are thrown into a stressful situation, and we're seeing it in the first person point of view from a kid who is having a nervous breakdown. And almost all of Infinite Jest is written in the third person. There are some rare exceptions, and we'll talk about that. But Wallace is making a statement here by bringing us into this first person fever dream. And so it's November in the year of the glad, and it is very hot outside still. And Hal Incandenza is 18 years old, is here for the Whataburger tournament, and he hails from the Enfield Tennis Academy in Boston, Massachusetts, or a little bit outside of town. And there are a couple people there with him. The first to note, which is Uncle Tavis, who is the headmaster of the Enfield Tennis Academy, and he's also the half brother of Avril, which is Hal's mother, who is also an administrator of the Enfield Tennis Academy. And this is important to know, a lot of this familial stuff, because Wallace is really writing about his mother just as a foreshadowing through Avril. He was so nervous about writing about her that he didn't give her the copy of the book until right before it was going to be published. He's also accompanied by a man named DeLint, who is just a staff member, even though they call him a pro-rector at the Enfield Tennis Academy. And from here on out, I'm going to call it ETA. And another note about me not being the foremost expert, whatever I miss, leave down in the comments below for this week's discussion. And if I feel like it's relevant or I made an egregious mistake, I will add it to the text section so that people can get further value. And thank you for being patient with me on kind of this first draft of an eventual course, which I hope to modify, edit, and almost make perfect. And the first line of Infinite Jest goes, I am seated in an office surrounded by heads and bodies. And this is important because what did we learn at the end of chapter 1? Well, that Don Gately, Hal Incandenza, and John Wayne, and why isn't John Wayne competing at the Whataburger event? Because as you remember, we hear Hal say how good he is and how if he was there, he would win it. And they are digging up Hal's father's head. And a lot of the time in the novel, Hal's father is referred to as himself. And what's interesting about this disconnection, first of all, between head and body, is that Hal is not connected. His mind and body are obviously not connected because what happens at the end of the chapter when he's gurgling and having a freak out. But Wallace has a subtle use of language throughout the work where Hal slowly moves his hand. He slowly smiles, but it's really a grimace. But then the administrators are twerking. They're moving fast. And so that's just a small little contrast within here, that we have this guy who is actually the manic one, but he's presenting himself almost unreliably as somewhat calm until later on when we learn what has happened. Even when he's on the ground and he's describing like that experience, it feels very light. It doesn't feel harsh, but he makes everyone else seem tense. And Greg Carlisle says about Hal Incandenza's connection to Hamlet that he talks to his audience. He has an uncle in a position of authority over him. He has a penchant for introspection and attention to detail. He has a complex nature that is by turns passionate and reasonable. He's misunderstood or even regarded as insane by other authors. His father is dead. He participates in a graveyard scene. Hal has a significant memory, or Oren's report of an event from his childhood in this chapter. Hamlet's memory of his childhood with Yorick prompts the monologue from which the novel's title is taken. And so I need to talk about this in the future, but Wallace does have a clip. I have a clip saved about where he talks about Hamlet's influence on Infinite Jest. But I just want to note some of that because we will find more scattered throughout the novel. So for those who have watched or read Hamlet or watched the play or whatever, be on the lookout for that. That's our first indication there. And so he's in this office with three deans: the dean of admissions, athletic affairs, and academic affairs. Also, the tennis coach and the director of composition. And they're in this office, the AC is blowing, and we see on the walls these Friedrich Remington paintings. So it's got this Southwest decor. I am eventually going to be doing an Infinite Jest tour and showing you guys where I think this interview takes place in the general art. And it feels what you think it looks like. Or excuse me, it is what you think it appears in your head. Anyway, let's not get lost on that. But once again, to exemplify kind of this subtle language, Hal is saying, I am in here. I appear to be neutral. I'm going to cross my legs. My hands are in an X. Very chill. But one of the deans is described immediately as, something stamped into an uncooperative material. That's his personality. Even though all these guys are trying to do is just talk to him. If he just acts like a normal human being and says, hey, I've had a hard couple years, but I'm really committed to playing tennis and really putting my best foot forward. And, maybe if you guys want to ask me to do a writing sample right now, in front of the director of composition, I can show you guys that I can write a decent paragraph and yada, yada, yada. Just, some terrible things have happened in my family. You guys get the point. And Hal is being super extra. He's listening and critiquing to everyone's language because he is a little boy genius. He's questioning if he should scratch his jaw. He's counting the hairs on these guys' beards and heads. He's going way too crazy right now. And I think Wallace puts this episode at the start of the novel, because it's important and it's somewhat iconic, but also it makes us question what this idea of a nervous breakdown is. Because, okay, we have Hal here, and he's being weird, and he's being questioned, and it sucks. But if for any of you guys who have attended university, if you've ever had to deal with the administration and the dean and any of these types of things, it gives you the most overwhelming anxiety ever. Just for some reason, I think from educational trauma and us being scared of the principal's office and the assistant principal's office, that there's this overwhelming anxiety. I've been a teacher for the past 7 years, and every single time I step in to one of my principal's office or an assistant principal's office, I freak out. I have overwhelming anxiety. And I literally think it tracks back to me just being nervous about getting sent there when I was a kid, because I have a great boss in administration who are super cool, and I've never been in trouble. They would never, play hide the cookie or throw me off guard or do anything like that. They're super upfront. And so even if I'm going in there to literally sign a paper, I feel weird. But if I see him outside of the office, everything's cool. And so there's just something about being critiqued by kind of these academic overlords that gives a weird feeling. But you have to ask the question, and coming back to subsidized time and a lot of the other questions, well, Hal's crazy, right? He's just having a nervous breakdown. Or is he? Because this world, this North American superstate, and him being interviewed for tennis by these guys, and what academia has turned into, and what the world has turned into, especially in 2009 when this is supposed to be it's supposed to be taking place, is he really the crazy one? And I know that's a very cliche high school thing to say, but I really think that's what Wallace is trying to show us here. Because Hal writes beautiful essays on the semantics of physical modality. But the basis of this whole chapter is that, and which like I said, I'm not trying to turn this into super summary, because especially for this section, you guys understand what's going on. But they're hammering him over his grades, his SAT scores, and his essays, which they think has all been doctored. I mean, and this is true. I mean, as a teacher, I have seen, not at the school I'm at right now, which, they do a good job at this, but at school I worked at previously in Las Vegas, I would see athletes' grades get doctored like crazy. Even if the teacher was defiant, the administration would come in and just raise them so that they could pass or get certain scholarships. I mean, it was crazy. And the treatment and what they could do to other kids and not get in trouble because of their athletics was scary. And that was in a public school. I had heard rumors of another high school in Las Vegas called Bishop Gorman, which always has a top 15 high school football team in the country, letting the kids get away with crazy stuff. And some of the students that they would recruit out of state because they were a private school to come didn't work on anything anyway. So this is a problem. And, with private schools, especially a very small specialized school, and where his mom is is an administrator and his uncle is the headmaster, it all seems a little bit weird. But once again, it wouldn't be a problem except that Hal doesn't speak. And it's the most hilarious thing in the world seeing CT and Hal's, well, CT, well, excuse me, Uncle Tavis just trying to defend Hal and like blow it all over and get him out of there without talking. I was laughing and howling as I've been rereading it. It's so good. And something to note that happens all throughout Infinite Jest is that we'll get an introduction of something like the Anfield Tennis Academy, then it becomes ETA for the rest of the book. Charles Tavis becomes CT. And that's because I think Wallace understood that having to say it over and over again, like me at the start of this video, forgetting to call it ETA, it's annoying. And so if anyone out there has a deeper analysis of why Wallace is doing that, I tried to think it out in my head. I just couldn't really find anything. So let me know about that. I think it's just utility. And talking about the other big point of contrast between silence and articulation, because who is Hal talking to in the first person? He's talking to you and I. It's like kind of metafiction. He is speaking to us, or, telling the story like we see at the end, like who is going to ask my story? But to everyone else, he appears totally different. And Wallace does this to show the main point really of Infinite Jest and what we've started to slip into in this kind of modern era, which is we are all living in our own head with our own private realities and fantasies. And this has obviously been going on forever, but as the world and you become more self-conscious, you have the ability to live within this private fantasy. But with media and technology, it's really easy to do that. And so we're constantly asked as a reader to be looking into these characters and asking what the hell is really going on, because we're getting their fantasy. And that's typical in all fiction. I mean, that's what storytelling is. But Wallace really accentuates this by creating such polarizing characters and plot lines. And Infinite Jest is also like a Mercury retrograde, because one of the other main themes is communication issues. Because when you are super self-absorbed, whether that is in your own addiction or to be the best tennis star or any of these things, what are you really? Well, you were like a child, because a real human thinks of their family or, ethical concerns or whatever else, and it's a little bit more complex. But total self-absorption actually is a regression back to toddlerhood, where it's all about you, where you're not even thinking, it's just all about needs and these types of things. And there's also themes of characters having to be taken care of and these types of things. And Hal says that his current writing ability is like an infant stabbing at a keyboard. And speaking of communication issues, why is Hal so silent? Well, later on in the novel, we'll get to figure that out. But we are maybe giving a key, and I'd like to know maybe down below if you guys think that this is relevant. Because, okay, we're going through the story, things aren't going good. We're starting to get to the point where, Hal is there alone and he has to answer a question. And then we flashback, we go to a memory, and it's not his own memory. His brother Oren told him of this incident. And so it's like a memory of a memory. And so this takes place back at their old house, and he's dealing with his mom, Avril, and he calls her the moms. The dad is himself. And Hal takes this bit of mold and bites into it and tells his mom. And his mom has a fear of things that are nasty. She says she feared and loathed more than anything spoilage and filth. So she starts freaking out and telling everyone, God help, my son ate this. And Hal told her, I ate this. And as Hal is about to start his fake monologue that he doesn't actually give, we switch to the section, but he finally speaks. He says, I'm not just a jock, I say slowly, distinctly. And he starts doing something. But as he starts talking, he stops. He closes his eyes and says, I cannot make myself understood now. I'm speaking slowly and distinctly. Call it something I ate. So he is seemingly calling back to that time to blame that, which is crazy. But as we're going to see, Hal and his brothers all have various issues. And so I guess in his mind, that's the origin. And so we finally get to the climactic scene where Hal says, I read, I say. I study and read. I bet I've read everything you've read. Don't think I haven't. I consume libraries. I wear out spines and ROM drives. I do things like get in a taxi and say, the library, and step on it. My instincts concerning syntax and mechanics are better than your own. I can tell, with due respect, but it transcends the mechanics. I'm not a machine. I feel and believe. I have opinions. Some of them are interesting. I could, if you let me, talk and talk. Let's talk about anything. I believe the influence of Kierkegaard on Camus is underestimated. I believe Denis Gabor may have very well been the Antichrist. I believe Hobbes is just Rousseau in a dark mirror. I believe with Hegel that transcendence is absorption. I could interface you guys right under the table, I say. I'm not just a Cretus, manufactured, conditioned, bred for a function. And for people who say Wallace cannot write, I mean, I think this section also just disproves that wholeheartedly. That here he's building up this moment where he's going to say something, even though he's just gurgling, which makes it even better. This really is Hal's mind. This is one of the more epic speeches I've ever read in literature. It really speaks to a lot of our souls and moments where we've been in our life, and this is what we want to say. When I'm teaching and the kids aren't listening or putting their heads down or being outright mean to me or throwing stuff at me, like I am real. I am not a machine. So let's have some fun here and kind of deep dive into some of the things that Hal is saying, because we're smart people. Let's have fun with it. So first of all, I love this line. My instincts concerning syntax and mechanic are better than your own. I can tell. But it transcends the mechanics. I'm not a machine. It's so funny. He's like, even though I know all that, I still feel. And so when we hear that Kierkegaard's influence on Camus was underrated, well, Kierkegaard is considered the father of existentialism, and Kierkegaard's idea of the leap of faith, which stated that true faith in God kind of means that you have to make a personal commitment well beyond any rationality, ethical or evidential claims. Because, in the field of apologetics in Christianity, it's always a big deal. Like, prove it. But no, you don't need to. You can just take that leap of faith. And speaking of Hegel, Kierkegaard was doing this because Hegelianism was massive in the mid-19th century and was calling for this rationalistic or systematic view of truth. But take this leap of faith, it's action-oriented. In the midst of the lack of evidence or any of these things, you still take this leap. But Camus rejects this idea with his absurd heroes like Sisyphus because he doesn't want us to look for any transcendent or metaphysical escapes. We need to rebel against nihilism and this concept of meaningless, because we shouldn't deny or reject or move away from the absurd, but use it to motivate us to, live with passion and, vigor, but without hope, which is kind of this interesting paradox, but it's almost the inverse. Well, I guess, Kierkegaard was doing a double positive. He was saying we need to take this irrational leap of faith and then believe that there, and have hope for this bigger meaning. But Camus, on the other hand, sliced that second part out. But I would ask Wallace, I wish I could know, and if any of you geniuses out there, how do you think that this relationship expands further? Because I've kind of racked my brain for the last couple minutes. I'm like, okay, we could go deep, but I don't want to sell us on anything that I don't necessarily think has any legs. So why do you think Wallace said that, or Hal said that? And Wallace alludes to Denis Gabor, who invented the idea of holograms, and says he may have well been the Antichrist. But if you remember on page 7, one of the essays that he wrote was titled Holographically Mimetic Cinema, which is probably a shout out to his father, who was a filmmaker. And as we're going to see, a lot of this involves the movie Infinite Jest, yada, yada, yada. And maybe some of that illusionary stuff really made him believe that he was the Antichrist, which kind of shows where his state of mind is at right now. But as we'll see throughout the novel, there's good reason for Hal to be feeling this way. And so the next assertion Wallace makes is that Hobbes is just Rousseau in a dark mirror. And so Hobbes he didn't invent, but he was very influential on Rousseau on this idea of the social contract, because in his work, The Leviathan, it states that in life before society and law, it was brutish or nasty and these types of things. And that in that type of world, in a true anarchy, we are all driven by self-interest, and all this type of perpetual war, though, eventually creates a fear of death and a hope for a better life, which eventually makes us form, these social contracts with each other and eventually, governments. Nothing too mind-blowing, right? But, back then it was. because you have to remember that they were dealing with monarchies and the aristocracy, and guys like Rousseau were going to pick this up, and they were starting to gain control. The citizens and people were starting to think about government, about their future, about a lot of these issues because of their own suffering and their increased intelligence. And so it was like, okay, we have to start at ground zero with a lot of this political philosophy stuff. And Hobbes is somewhat McCarthyian in the sense like he believes in kind of the inherent evil, but Rousseau in the social contract and discourse on inequality rejects this and said that these early humans were mostly peaceful and solitary beings, and they've been corrupted by societal forces to become evil. And he invents this idea of the noble savage, that if we were all living out pretty disconnected from each other, we would be uncorrupted from a lot of the problems that we have now. And I would agree at a lot of levels. And, it sucks, because there's always going to be that maniac. There's always going to be the inbred or someone crazy who creates problems, who creates the ripples of violence that eventually lead to these types of things, or the person who's ambitious enough, or a group who becomes hyper ambitious and forces everybody to change. But that is the virus of, the world, or of language and technology. And so in the Leviathan, Hobbes calls for a strong ruler, a sovereign power or person who, elected democratically, has unchallenged authority to make sure that we don't fall into these deeper passions. And so it's individual, freedoms are sacrificed for this greater good type situation. But Rousseau contrasts this by saying that we need to be more democratic, and our social contracts need to be governed by the general will of the people, and that physical safety is kind of this red herring that gets away from this idea that we need to have liberty and education and respect for each other, because Hobbes and the Leviathan and a lot of people had just used pure fear to motivate us to bow down to this Leviathan figure. So now connecting this idea, now that I've given some backstory for you guys. So what binds them together is the social mirror. But as you just saw, they're dyadically opposed with what they want: total control, democratic control. Hobbes believes in disorder inherently, Rousseau doesn't. And there's also a nice dialectic that's created here, because what happens if the collective desire is manipulated or misinterpreted? We see that a lot today. We've been elevated in this Rousseauian kind of society where physical safety isn't as big of a deal, but certain governments or interest groups can manipulate our minds and our thoughts. And then, so what happens if that goes off course? And so on one side of the dialectic is a kind of comical laugh at Rousseau's optimism surrounding what we can achieve as humans. But Rousseau bases his whole argument off this idea of societal corruption. And so if we are going to elect this Leviathan, it's obviously going to devolve, like it has almost every single time in history, not every time, but most of the time, into, barbaric tyranny. And what's interesting is, he's evoking certain people. So Hal does have the Camusian spirit. He is kind of this more independent person who does live life with optimism and direction, but is generally nihilistic. He also is mentioning the social contracts in this situation where this academic institution is looking to rule over him and is almost questioning him if they want to enter a contract with him. And then as a second, when we will see with Hegel, these three ideas kind of connect together. And so that's what we'll stop there with the dark mirror. I could go on, but very, very funny analysis by Wallace. So then Wallace also says that I believe with Hegel that transcendence is absorption. So before that, we had two dialects actually with Hobbes and Rousseau, and then Camus and Kierkegaard. And so Hegel, we're going to talk Hegel really fast. So Hegel believes in this idea of transcendence, but most of the time when you hear that word, or philosophically transcendence, it seems like we're exiting the forms, we're going into higher dimensions, or we're moving outside of something. Would be a nice way to describe it. And it could just be something small, like transcending outside of a thought, or like pure transcendence. But Hegel believes that we never really transcend anything, and we never escape reality, but we move through it. We subulate through reality's contradictions and limitations to reach a more fuller, like a more high definition reality, but we never escape it. And this is, you see the kind of threads of Gnosticism in here a little bit, which is, German idealism is inspired heavily by. And so this word subulation is the key to connecting this idea of transcendence with absorption. And so there are three different aspects of subulation, or sublation, excuse me, and they are negation, preservation, and elevation. And so when something is being subulated, it is first of all negated, and then it is preserved, and eventually it is elevated into new higher states of existence, or, high definition. And so what makes this beautiful is that for Wallace, transcendence as absorption in the Hegelian system means that the lower stages of this, the kind of first stages of development, whether that is in logical matters, spiritual matters, or in nature, or in worldly matters, they are absorbed into this higher state. So all these things that Hal is going through are absorbed, and they aren't lost. And that's what makes this really beautiful at the start of this novel, and ties all these ideas together, is that all of Infinite Jest it's transforming and integrating into each other. It is, fractals, as Wallace had talked about before. It's sublating into higher levels. It's not leaving. Some authors, when you read it, feels like you're throwing stuff away. I mean, even like in Blood Meridian, it has a different philosophy of transcendence. So I think that's just a really cool note here. And just to clarify it one more time, Hal is actually not giving this speech. He's making these, utteral weird noises and convulsing, and it's so bad that they recognize he's having this breakdown. This is so funny, you guys. This is comical, because I've done this before. All of us have had, I hate the term social anxiety, but we've all fallen flat socially before in our life. And it feels like we're moving like this, and that's how everyone's perceiving me. And so we have one of many scenes in bathrooms and locker rooms throughout Infinite Jest. So Hal is taken to a bathroom, and his uncle's he digests things. He is just having trouble communicating. And what's interesting, once again, we have a polarity here between Hal's ability on the court and him just being a total imbecile in this social situation. He is a savant on the course, especially at this point in the novel. And another interesting thing that also is a slight mirror is that when he's freaking out back in the office, he keeps saying, God and help me, or excuse me, the administrators are saying, God and help. And that is exactly what Hal's mother, Avril, was saying. And guys, the next scene is so funny when he's talking about how he's going to be put to sleep, how they're going to ask him some questions, and eventually he's going to go night-night. I mean, this is how it is. I mean, drug use and addiction, that path, there have been times, even if you've never been strapped down to a stretcher. Let me tell you guys a story. I got a great story for you guys. I don't think I've ever told this one on the channel. If you've made it this far, this is your treat. So I had this friend who had a ton of childhood trauma, as bad as you can imagine, the worst. And so he had a lot of demons within him, and he started experimenting with psychedelics, and he viewed me as his advisor or his guide. And I was like, hey man, first of all, I don't know if you are particularly right now the candidate for this, because you're going to unearth a whole lot of stuff. So if you are going to do this, I would really take a conservative dose, really see what psychedelics are, because your disposition is very prone to a bad trip. And mind you, this guy is a professional out in the world, a 27-year-old with a job and respect in the community. But he had started to slip. So anyway, he decides to take 4 grams of shrooms, which, if you don't know, that's a lot. I mean, you're definitely can hallucinate on that amount and really get, put yourself out there. And at the start, he does a good job, and he mostly stays at home. And, he poos in the bed and has some incidents, but eventually, I won't judge him on that, but he decides he needs to go to CVS, and everything's going okay. I mean, he's driving, which I guess isn't okay, but he gets to CVS and he gets out and he's outside and everything's good. But then when he walks inside and sees all the people and the lights and everything, he has a mental breakdown, and he walks up to the counter and there's a big line of people, and he throws himself onto it and says, I'm dying. And this guy, he doesn't look like a bum. He doesn't look like a crackhead or someone who would do this. He's a teacher still at a high school in Las Vegas. And he's sliding off the thing after he's saying, I'm dying. And so they pick him up. the people pick him up and they bring a chair over and he's sitting there for like 30 minutes. And then he finally snaps out of it and is like, oh shit, I need to get out of here. And he leaves. And so he tells me all this. And I'm like, okay, man, you made some big mistakes here. You took way too much. You drove. You went out in public. And I was like, back to the old advice. You need to relax. And if you're going to do this, take a small amount alone with no interference, nowhere to go, get everything you need. Next time I hear from him, a week later, he's calling me from jail, rewinding what happened. He's got all these shrooms still. And so he decides to invite a friend over he hasn't seen since high school. So 9 years. You guys know how far you grow apart from people in 9 years. And so it's night this time, and they both take 4 grams. This other guy has never taken shrooms either. And so they take the shrooms, and it's way too much, obviously, especially for this other guy. I mean, this teacher had been experimenting with weed and booze and other stuff. So like he wasn't necessarily unfamiliar with this stuff. And so this other guy had recently deconverted or unconverted from Christianity, and they knew each other from like church all the way back when they were 18. So he didn't have that much experience. So he starts freaking out and telling my friend that the mushrooms are laced with heroin. They're like, this is so intense that this must be heroin, that we're going to die. Like, we're dying. We're going to overdose on heroin. And so my friend is so freaked out by this proposition that he gets in his car once again. He's got a sports car and he starts driving, and the road eventually, it's like the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas road. Even though it was nighttime, it's out in Henderson. And so I'll show you guys right now. So if you guys can see out there, that's the Las Vegas Strip. So at night, it's really nice. We have this, little road, speed limit's 45, as you see, just desert. There's no houses. And he's going like 110 down this speedway, this road. And he gets pulled over. And, you're going 110. You're already fucked. You're probably going to get tested and DUI'd, but he isn't drunk. And so maybe he could get away with some of this, because from what I know, I don't think they're going to test for psilocybin, even if they get to the point of a blood test. And so the cop walks up to him, and instead of trying to do whatever he could to not get arrested, he says, oh my God, why were you speeding? He's like, I'm trying to get to the hospital. I'm on mushrooms laced with heroin. So of course the cop takes him out, and my buddy was also super into like martial arts. He was a wrestler in high school. And so they start trying to arrest him. He starts scuffling a little bit, but he's doing like flow jujitsu, he's like lightly pushing them over, and like their backup has come, and eventually they arrest him and take him downtown. And this is the Las Vegas drunk tank, where all the people from the Strip are from. And he's in the big holding cell, I'm sure you've seen like on TV before. And he eventually takes off all of his clothes and starts doing yoga, because at that time I was a yoga teacher in town, and he had been to some of my yoga classes. He had recently gotten into yoga too. And he's like, I was doing the sequences, then you taught me naked. And so eventually they come and get him, and they take him away, and he's screaming and fighting, and they put him in this straitjacket and tie him to a chair. This is, 5 hours before this, he was teaching kids in Las Vegas. And he told me that eventually they came to draw his blood, and they're coming in with the needle, and he's screaming that they're giving me the lethal injection. And eventually he sobers up after a couple hours, obviously, and then he's stuck in the straitjacket still. And what's crazy about that guy is that whole story, he's still a teacher. But this story and them strapping him down to the stretcher, it reminded me of that. And I had to go bail him out from jail. It was a whole ordeal. And then this guy comes to work a couple days later, and he's all wide-eyed. He's like, I'm like, dude, this guy. Anyway, he's now in a much more stable spot in his life. And so kudos to him. He's done a lot of work, and, that was a low point. But sometimes you have to do stuff like that to, reach the next level. So I love when he started considering Hal does the word, the synonyms for unresponsive. And it's such a fall from grace. Hal is saying the same Aubrey DeLint I dismissed for years as a 2D marionette. Note Gurney side to say, just hang in there, buckaroo. I mean, I got another story for you guys. I mean, why not? I mean, I'll let it all out here on the free video. I had another friend at university, and we were taking this super postmodernist class. So there's a professor at my University of Nevada, Las Vegas, who will remain unnamed. And she is as communist, liberal, politically correct as you can get, but she's wicked smart, like, PhD from Harvard. Really, I won't even say the topics she's into. And she's a serious individual. Like, she doesn't have pink hair and running around. Like, she is serious, and she like looks you in the eye and talks to you. And it's very, very intense, and like beautiful lectures like we would read. Yeah, all the postmodernists and stuff. So there's this guy in there, and he was very smart. Like, he was really into postmodernism, had read a bunch. And I knew he had some drug problems. I mean, I knew he was drinking and smoking weed and stuff, but I suspected other things because he was just kind of phased out a lot of the time. And he would say as such, but I felt like there was like a daily habit or addiction going on. Not that he was just like a party boy or something, but genius. And him and this lady really liked each other and vibed and connected because they would commiserate over whatever, theory or whatever. And that was fine. Like, great. I love those people. Those guys are so smart. Like, I will never fall into the Jordan Peterson neo-Marxist postmodernist propaganda that it all sucks. Like, it's the reason people hate it most of the time is they're too dumb to read it. And it takes so much effort to read. And the foundational knowledge of Plato and Nietzsche and Heidegger and everyone else in that lineage that, and not to sound too highfalutin and you need to it's not the most important thing in the world, but it's really mind-blowing stuff. Anyway, and and all the guys I know who are super into that stuff and believe it, like almost all of them have a drug problem or on antidepressants or overweight, anger problems. Like, it's very rare that I meet a nihilist or one of these postmodernist lit boys that have a certain integrity of masculinity and honor, or even the classic masculine intellect within them. Like, it's all been warped and corrupted, and all the loss of values and health and family have really done a number on them. In my opinion, they took way too much out too fast and, didn't respect what others had built for them anyway. Because I love that. Like, I love postmodernism, but I apply it to my life and to my reality in a limited quantity. And the same with yoga and meditation. I've been doing yoga forever, but there is a high degree of separation from the mystical states and the feelings I do in meditation practice and how I act outside. Because if you guys have ever seen the woo, hey, what's up, bro? Yeah, we're doing yoga. You want a crystal? Yeah. I don't want to be like that, because that they are applying the meditation, higher consciousness reality or feeling all throughout their life. And that's antithetical to knowledge. You can't exist in that state. I mean, when you look at a lot of Buddhists, a lot of the time, even the most high level bodhisattvas and stuff were a balance of both. Anyway, they weren't talking like that. They were very pinpoint with their speaking and with their mind and their actions. So one day we're in this class and the teacher's going on about theory, and homeboy's looking a little out, and then he gets up, he stands up in front of everyone, goes, "Wah!" And he falls down. And this is like in an 8 a.m. class. And I get up. I mean, everyone else. So the teacher walks over and she's like, "We have an emergency, code 142 in room 94. And then she just stands there. And then I'm looking around and no one's doing anything. People are checking their phones. And this guy is passed out. And I'm rolling him over on the side and I'm slapping, like, come on, man. Like, oh, come on, are you there, dude? Like, I'm like freaking out. I'm like, is this guy going to die in front of us? This is our compatriot. This is shocking. Why are people overdosing in class? And so, yeah, in retrospect, he took too many pills at once. He was trying to, do uppers and downers at once, and he went down in class. He was in there 2 days later, but they brought him in on the stretcher, and he was staring at the sky. "I'm sorry." And so I want to mention a couple things that we see and people we meet. And these are people we're going to see again. So I'm going to add them to the list at the bottom. These are people we need to keep our minds open to and be able to remember. Cosgrove Watt, the grief therapist. The moms, which is Avril Incandenza, his mother. Himself, who is his father, who is the director of Infinite Jest. John Wayne, who was supposed to win this year's Whataburger. Don Gately, who you've heard me talk about before, who is the other real major character in this novel, who helped dig up their father's head with John Wayne. And then we have some opponents, one of who is blind and that's going to, I think, play a big part in the theory we're going to be leaving, this blind opponent. There are references to the sky. Wallace did talk about it being a blue cover because we see the blue sky, the blue jaw, and the blue collar. He thinks of a plane making an incision in a blue sky. And then he thinks about someone who carved the word knife in a public bathroom while he's on the floor in a public bathroom. Just things to note in the bathroom. As he's being strapped, he thinks about once again being infantile. Once again, the reference back to the baby. And so I'm going to call it here. We could go on, but if I keep it up at this rate, this course is going to be well over 100 hours by the end, which is fine. But I think this is a good place to start. If you have any questions, ask down below. Come to the office hours. Email me if you need to. Obviously, you can ask in the book club. And so thank you guys for being here, and I will see you in the next